Nigeria's economy is a middle-income mixed economy and emerging markets with expanding manufacturing, financial, service, communications, technology, and entertainment sectors. Nigeria is in the top 30 or so economies in the world in terms of nominal GDP and is the largest economy on the African continent. But even with all this, the giant of Africa is currently on its knees. Nigeria's scant fiscal resources are in part linked to its oil and gas sector. It is an open secret that crude oil exports account for half of government revenues and 90% of foreign exchange earnings, leaving state funds vulnerable to changes in the prices of fossil fuels. The National Bureau of Statistics puts the unemployment rate in the country at about 33%, while the number of Nigerians living in poverty rose to 133 million, or 63% of the population in 2022. Africa's largest economy and the continent's top oil producer has resources and wealth. But the global pandemic and the economic fallout from the war in Ukraine hit the country hard in President Muhammadu Buhari's last term. Joining me to look at the economy Nigeria's next president will inherit is Taiwo Oyedele, fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leader at PwC Nigeria. Taiwo, welcome again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tolu, for having me.
So let's go just a few weeks back, and that's in January, where we heard from the Debt Management Office, who told us that Nigeria's next president would inherit no less than 77 trillion naira as debt after President Buhari leaves office. Now, for a country that's struggling to make money to keep revenues up, this is obviously a very hefty sum. How much do you think this will have an impact on the next president's attempts to either make money or even manage Nigeria's fiscal space?
Thank you. So you're right. The next president is going to be inheriting an economy about 200 trillion naira in GDP, which is the largest in Africa. Has a lot of opportunities to be able to grow because if you think about the GDP per capita, it's just about $2,000. Whereas if you look at similar countries like Indonesia, for example, they have made a lot of progress and the issues are similar to us. And so therefore, we also have the opportunity to make progress as well. So while it's very easy, we sometimes default into finding what will be difficult, what could go wrong. I'd like to look at it slightly differently from a positive perspective. And that is that the 77 trillion naira debt, while it may look significant, we can turn it to an opportunity. An opportunity in the sense that it's not even up to 40–50% of our GDP. And you have very developed countries, Japan, the US, having more than 100% of their GDP in debt. In other words, the focus for the next CEO of Nigeria will be how do you ensure that, one, the cost of servicing that debt is something that is affordable by raising our revenue in a very efficient way without introducing new taxes or increasing the rate of existing ones? How do we ensure that whatever funds we borrow, every one naira is applied, not only in terms of the right priority of spending, but also the efficiency of spending?
A quick break in transmission there, but we're back now with my guest Taiwo Oyedele as we look at the Nigeria that the next president will inherit. Now, Taiwo, you were talking about sort of looking at this as in a different way, with an opportunity to see it for the incoming president as an opportunity in terms of the taxation conversation, which I want to ask about, and the debt servicing conversation. But I want us to go to the debt servicing conversation because it's one that many people are concerned about. And when you look at the tax to GDP ratio across sub-Saharan Africa, the average is about 15% in 2022. With Nigeria, it's about 7%. And many are worried that Nigeria's next president may not have any option but to borrow. We already have about 77 trillion naira of debt. We're going to be subsidizing fuel at a cost of about 6.7 trillion or about $7.5 billion this year alone. There's not a lot of options that Nigeria's next president may have. And I saw one article that said Nigeria's next president will be on a tight fiscal leash. What opportunities are in that space that the president will have to decide on? All right, so unfortunately, it looks like we may be having some technical difficulties in having this conversation, but there are a number of issues, and I can give you some of the data that we know surrounds the conversation that we're going to be having as Nigeria chooses another president. So as I said earlier, in January, Nigeria's Debt Management Office said that the next president would inherit no less than 77 trillion naira in debt, and that would be after President Muhammadu Buhari leaves after his second term in office. Now, from there, we saw debt servicing also overtake revenue in 2022, and it's something that many are worried will likely reoccur again in this year. Now, Finance Minister Zainab Ahmed revealed that the country spends about 80% of its taxes paying off outstanding debt, and by comparison, the World Bank recommends a debt service to revenue ratio of no more than 22% for low-income countries. Again, it's the data that we're looking at here. Then let's look at something else. Unlike its regional peers, Nigeria's repayment challenges relate primarily to the country's low rate of revenues. Now, according to the International Monetary Fund projections, tax to GDP ratios across sub-Saharan Africa averaged 15% in 2022. In Nigeria, the figure was just 7%. It seems the country's next president may have no other option than to borrow. But what would that look like for Nigeria's incoming president? What else do we need to take a look at? Of course, subsidy is there because debt servicing is not the only thing that's draining the country's finances. Let me see if I can manage to get Taiwo in on this conversation before we wrap up for today. Taiwo, are you with me? Hello, Taiwo.
Yes, sorry, I'm back now.
No problem. It's very well understood. So very quickly, because of time, I want us to look at the sort of meeting point of the debt servicing conversation, the debts we owe, and of course, the subsidy conversation as well. Do you think the president who comes in next will have any other option than to borrow, as Nigeria has a very precarious financial situation that it's facing?
I'll say in the immediate term, the president will have no option but to borrow. But that's a problem that you can start fixing even within the first 100 days. And you can start by first harmonizing all manners of agencies who are collecting revenue and not being accountable. So Nigerians are actually currently paying those taxes. The money is not getting to government. Number two, you can find a very practical and pragmatic way to remove the subsidy such that the poorest people are still protected. And you can take the excuse from Labour and the other people trying to insist that you must continue to subsidize. You may find also a very practical way to try and harmonize the exchange rate. There's a significant subsidy that is going into exchange rate, mismanagement, and that can also help you. And also you can look for areas of efficiency. How do you prioritize government spending so that even if you have to borrow, every 1 naira you borrow is bringing value of more than 1 naira to the economy? And more importantly, how do you enable the private sector to really power the economy, including opportunities for private-public partnership to fund a lot of viable capital projects? So I think, which is why I said I'd like to look at these as opportunities. I see very significant opportunities for the next CEO to change the narrative for Nigeria, and we continue to see a lot of progress from that point forward.
Okay. So we've talked about taxation a lot, and you've even mentioned taxation today already. And there's no way it won't come up with the next administration. I mentioned earlier the tax to GDP ratio in sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria has one of the lowest of that. But the conversation has been about not just widening the tax net, but also deepening the tax net. But Nigerians are already poor. Millions more are in poverty, and we continue to struggle with the rising cost of living. How do you think the next president should handle this conversation, this implementation, this need, as it is, to raise taxes, or at least to raise revenue from taxes, not necessarily to raise taxes themselves?
Yeah, so I think that conversation has to start by doing a study of the tax system, because we have structural issues with the revenue system, not only at the federal, but also at the sub-national level. And to pretty much redesign the tax system in a way that the burden of tax is not disproportionately on the poorest people, which is what we have at the moment. That conversation may have to start all the way from the Constitution, which I would admit is not an easy thing to do. So you start with the low-hanging fruit, whereas we then develop a medium to long-term plan of addressing it right from the constitution itself. It has to be that, in my view, you raise your revenue from less than 5% of the population. So the top 5% of the population can easily give you 15, 18% of your GDP in revenue, which is what you find in most places. Even in South Africa, the top 1% alone pays more than the bottom 99% of the population. So the problem in Nigeria is people who have the means to pay are not paying their fair share. And then we focus too much on the informal sector and very poor people who really have, nothing more to give than they're already doing. So when you do that, and government has to lead by example, not only the political office holders and their appointees, which is very important, that has to happen, but also the government agencies. We shouldn't find ourselves in a situation where, based on the Auditor General's report, the presidency is not paying taxes, EFCC is not paying taxes, National Assembly is not paying taxes. And we just hope that Nigerians will ignore that and keep paying their taxes. We have to restore that social contract, and that leadership has to start from the very top.
All right, so time is of the essence for me, but it's also of the essence for Africa's largest economy. Many have said when you look at articles and newspaper reports written now, it's the largest economy, it's on its knees, there's a tight fiscal leash. The descriptors are simply just not encouraging. And when we look at all the issues that the next president will have to face, there's security, there's health, there's education, but the economy is quite central to all of that. So Taiwo, what are the top 3 economic issues you expect to see the incoming president start to tackle, not necessarily solve, but at least start to tackle in his first or her first, because there is one female candidate among the 18 candidates for president, in the first 100 days?
Yeah, excellent question. Without a doubt, for me, the first thing would be the foreign exchange management. We have to then, one, be very transparent, not only in how it's being managed, but how it's being communicated, with a view to trying to harmonize the rate, I would say, in my view, within the first 3 to 6 months. That would be a very fundamental one. The second one will be dealing with subsidies, because they are distorting the economy. It's not allowing us, for example, to implement the Petroleum Industry Act. Because of that, we are not able to attract investment into the economy. We are not able to create the jobs we need to create. If you think about the African Continental Free Trade Area, I've been saying to myself, why can't Nigeria even refine 2 million barrels per day and say we are not exporting crude anymore? Take what you need locally and export the rest to the rest of Africa. And finally, but not the least, is coordination. There has to be a very deliberate, structural, and institutionalized method for coordinating the economic management. You shouldn't have people pulling in different directions, forming their own small governments. That coordination, I think, it will go a long way in helping Nigeria to chart forward a different path where we can see prosperity, not just for a few, but shared prosperity for all our citizens.
All right, Taiwo, we'll leave it at that. I know latest Monday, Tuesday, we will know who is very likely or who has won Nigeria's presidential elections. And then it gets into more of a conversation on that individual's economic antecedents and sort of their language around what they believe the economy should look like. So we'll be having more conversations as to the direction Nigeria will take in the coming months. Taiwo Oyedele, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tolulope.